My name's Lee, and I'm the father of a 42-year-old son with significant developmental disabilities. And my wife, Jean, and I adopted this boy when he was 4 days old and learned that he had major developmental disability. At the time, they diagnosed him as having cerebral palsy when he was 9 months of age. And I can tell everyone that everything changes in a heartbeat when that diagnosis is given to the family. And a wise person told me a number of years ago that when one person in your family is developmentally disabled, the entire family is disabled in some fashion. Everything changes. Family relationships with friends, career aspirations, expectations for your child, your individual freedom and flexibility, and all the milestones you had envisioned for your child. It all changes immediately and permanently. And it's something that any family that experiences a developmental disability will probably tell you something quite similar to that. It's life-changing event. My son is severely to profoundly developmentally disabled. He does not speak. He's never said a word in 42 years. He has very few means to communicate to us. He doesn't do sign language. He makes gestures and he goes and points to stuff that he wants, that sort of thing, but it's extraordinarily limited. Virtually everything one has to do for themselves in this life, we have to do for him, from feeding him to bathing him to administering medications, toileting, everything. And it's a monumental responsibility and a challenge, and we've needed help along the way. We've gotten it sometimes reluctantly by this infrastructure. When my wife was in the home therapy program, we had 13 to 15 volunteers a week come into the house, working 5 to 6 hours a day with them. And we did get to the point where we could teach him how to walk after he was 5 years of age. And that was probably one of the highlights of our program. When you're raising a developmental disabled person, the guilt and the anxiety you feel is omnipresent. It is relentless. A feeling you're never doing enough to assure that your person can be everything he can be. And you know the stages of grief. It's so common, everybody knows about it. The fact that you experience this intense loss, and then you go through stages until you find some acceptance and some level of peace. And I think all parents of developmentally disabled children go through those to some degree. And the difference between what a lot of people go through in these stages of grief and what we go through is that ours is it repeats itself. It's an endless loop. Just when you think you're making some progress in one part of their life, it comes to a conclusion and you're butting your heads against a brick wall, and you experience deep disappointment, a sense of loss, and then you're on to something else, and you make every effort to advocate for this or the education or the employment or whatever it is you really want done. And you just confront these major barriers and inability to get your goals accomplished, and you're sent back into this grief mode. Grief stages, just to remind everybody, was denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And just when you get to the acceptance stage, you're back in denial and anger because you're confronting a whole different challenge in your life. So there just never seems to be closure. I've been asked at times whether we've received the support and services that we've needed from, I guess I'd call it the DD infrastructure. including the state and the medical establishment, and educational establishment. And I'd say unequivocally, categorically, no, we have not. Just the simple stuff like the type of medical care he's received from virtually the day he was born to the present. We've had to struggle and fight and advocate aggressively for the medical care he's needed. Even something you think as simple as dental help would be something we could expect a little help from the state and the federal government. But I'll tell you, we have to make an appointment 2 years in advance for our son to go to what's called the Decode Clinic at the University of Washington, in which she's put in a papoose board, strapped in, and has his teeth cleaned for 20 minutes. It spent 5 years on a waiting list just to have his teeth x-rayed. I'm part of the fathers group in Jefferson County that is advocating for better housing options for our developmentally disabled adult children. And we've come up with a graph that we thought made some sense. And that we call it a parental perspective during the lifespan of both ourselves and our children. The first years we're caring for our developmentally disabled children, we're really focused on their potential. That's where all of our energy, all of our attention goes. And it also happens to be when we ourselves are young and have our maximum energy. So we're putting all of our energy and attention into reaching as full of potential as possible with our kid. And for the most part, we don't want to admit there's any limitations in our child's potential. So we go through this period where we're focused on the diagnosis and the birth to 3 programs. We do home therapy programs. First 5 years of our son's life, my wife did home therapy where we embrace this idea of frequency, intensity, and duration of stimulation. And point being that if you did exercise in a consistent, aggressive, frequent manner, you would achieve change. That the brain is very plastic at that stage in their life, and the chance of establishing new neural networks to replace those that are damaged are probably at the optimum point. And so you feel an urgency like very few people could probably comprehend, that you're up against the clock. You have got to make progress because in our case, our son's very life depends on it. So then you move on to the school years where you're tackling the individual education program. In terms of education, I want to put a plug in for those women in the 1960s or 50s that actually lobbied for changes in federal and state laws to allow our kids to go to school. Prior to their successful intervention, all of our kids were kept at home with no interaction with other kids, no education whatsoever. And they did a remarkable job of changing the entire environment for disabled kids and their families. We were able to benefit from the education system, but it has been hard. They're required to do individual education programs with our son on an annual basis, and sometimes I think they just got wrapped up in the bureaucracy, not in the intent of the law. And I'd hope that people listening to this, since we've been through all of this, would recognize there's a clear difference between intent and what's actually being done. And we were able to get our son into a fully integrated elementary educational setting for 4 years, which is marvelous. It was our Camelot moment in our lives. We felt the closest to normal at that point probably have ever felt. Experiencing the idea of our son being fully included in the regular classroom, it was just so delightful. It was so neat to see these kids accept him and realize that there are differences, but there are also things that are so similar. And they develop more tolerance and acceptance of people with differences. It was really a delight. I think it was one of the best times of his life and our life with him. And then once we got to the junior high school stage, the full integration in the classroom became virtually impossible. And they were very resistant to our efforts to push full integration. My wife, bless her soul, was pushing him to establish a program that would work for him. And what she received in return was they threatened her with a lawsuit for harassment. And so that forced us to hire a disability attorney and accompany us to the IAP sessions. So once again, we had to fight aggressively for the rights that our son deserved to be honored. Then as he eventually moved his way out of the educational system, the transition into the community was virtually absent. There was nothing that prepared us for when the school said we're no longer going to educate your child, to when he was back in the home. It was almost neglect, in my opinion. So then after that, we got into this whole business of what are we going to do when he's home with us at 21 years of age with the significant disabilities he has. And so we finally were able to get him to something that would allow people to come in and take him out in the community for a couple hours and bring him back. And he had a chance at that time to really interact with other people, and it brought a little richness to his life and provide us a break. And it felt like that was okay. And then the state, in their infinite wisdom, decided that program lacked merit, because now they're going to be pushing for full and total integration, all aspects of the lives of our developmentally disabled adults. So they stopped doing that program, community access program, and required us to go place him in a pathways to employment program, which made absolutely no sense for him. Somebody that couldn't understand the concept of money, that had a major seizure disorder, cannot communicate. It was just frankly stupid. And we were being pushed into accepting a new initiative that was there for all the right reasons for people who are probably at the higher end of the developmental disability scale, but it didn't work at all for our son. So my point in saying all this is we've had to push, advocate probably as aggressively as anyone out there would have to for their child. And it's so different. We've raised both a daughter and our disabled son, and I can tell you that the difference between the two is night and day. There's nothing similar to it. Raising I don't know what the term is now, otherwise able child versus a developmentally disabled child. So it creates a real interesting dynamic. But once you get out of those school years, your attitude and your perspective changes from potential to more acceptance of reality. And so then you start looking at things, well, we got to establish guardianships, and we got to figure out we're going to transition them out of the school into the home. We're going to have to, how can we make a meaningful life occur for adult children? What is that going to take? How can they have a full life where they can experience the maximum they can experience and make their life feel worthwhile? And then you reach a final stage as a parent, where then what you're worried about is what's going to happen to them when we die or when we're incapacitated, which is, in our case, since we're in the late 70s, early 80s, is really imminent. It's not just an abstract exercise. we've got to answer this question on his behalf. So then our whole focus, a great part of our focus is how can we make sure he's cared for and loved when we're not here and we can't perform that function ourselves. So this most critical aspect of our parenting occurs when we have the least energy. We're at our lowest ebb and our lowest individual, our capacity to advocate is really reduced as opposed to those early years. So you'll see a lot of difference between parents that are younger parents that are focused on potential and older parents that are focused on this issue of long-term housing and support. There are, 26,000 adults in the caseload in Washington State, the Developmental Disabilities Administration. Of those 26,000, about 13,000 live outside the family home already at a cost of about $1 billion a year. But the other 13 to 14,000 are still living at home with their aging parents. And there's no real coherent plan in place to assure our parents of these folks that the funding is going to be there to provide the optimum housing for each and every one of those persons living at home. We have been, I think, in a crisis mode for a long time in Washington State. And it's evidenced by people in our group that where they're exhausted and they can no longer handle their dependent adult, and they're dropping their kids off at the hospital after spending years trying to find proper placement, walking away and saying, we can't do anymore, you have to solve the problem. That's really unconscionable planning. It is inexcusable. We're able to do better than that. And you shouldn't put people that are 60s, 70s, and 80s through this ringer. There needs to be a better plan in place that would inform parents what they need to do now to assure that when the time is right, their son or daughter will be able to be placed in an appropriate residential setting when the parents can no longer perform that function. We want our kids to be safely integrated into society on our passing, and I ask, is that really too much to ask? In that regard, we've got at our age, I'm speaking for older people that have dependents that are in the, I'd say, moderate to profound end of the developmental disability spectrum. I'm not speaking for everyone that is caring for someone that's very close to in the upper range of developmental disabilities. They've got their own issues. They've got their own reality, and I'm not speaking for them. I'm speaking for us because we've had a lot of experience with them. So we do develop a real acute sense of our own mortality. And it's left us with a feeling that we're really up against the clock. And we need to know that somebody's there to provide for him in a way that's reasonably similar to how we've cared for him all these years. It has been probably the most important thing in my life, in my wife's life, to have raised our son. He's brought a perspective to us. He's brought a richness to our life that could never be duplicated any other way. He'll never lead a normal, independent life. We've embraced that idea, but we think it's an entirely different mission. It's light years removed from being socially and economically integrated in society. Our guys have been placed here to make everyone around them better human beings. Now, I can guarantee you they made us better human beings. We're far better than we were before he came along. They contribute by making humanity just a bit more compassionate and empathetic and loving. They teach us about acceptance and sacrifice and discipline and unconditional love. They're the antithesis of greed, hate, and intolerance. They put up a huge stop sign for all those hell-bent on achieving wealth, status, recognition, and power. They're truly God's ambassadors. And that's my story.